Hi, I'm Laura-Rose, my pronouns are she, her, and I'm founder of LGBT Mummies. We are a global organisation that works to educate, support and advocate LGBT+ women and people on the path to motherhood or parenthood. Be it through fertility treatment, adoption, fostering or surrogacy, we will provide support on the LGBT+ pathway to becoming a parent. We do so through our website, social channels, private support groups and global online community, providing you with a safe haven to meet others with lived experience, to share your fears, your hopes, your dreams and celebrate your journey. We passionately advocate for LGBT+ women and people on the path to motherhood or parenthood by working directly with the NHS and other global organisations to provide equity and equality through healthcare, society and general paths to parenthood. We also hold our global event in the UK each year that has over 120 women and people and their families attend. From bumps to babies to eldest, they all come together to share and celebrate their journeys, meet other like-minded women and people and make friends. We also provide education, training and consultancy service to organisations that want to improve how diverse and how inclusive they are as an organisation through their support, their marketing collateral, their websites and how they share and support LGBT+ people on their journeys. Today we're going to be talking about navigating pregnancy as a member of the LGBT+ community. In regards to what we'll be discussing today, you may find it triggering or traumatic and it's okay to take a break and come back. So just to be aware. In this session today, we are going to be talking about your pregnancy journey. You're right at the beginning, it's a really exciting and nerve-wracking time, but you're finally here. You may have had an incredibly traumatic and difficult journey to this point where you've had to overcome barriers, implications, microaggressions and even discrimination. But you're finally here and it's really, really important that you take the time to understand and appreciate. Further things may happen that may become obstacles in your journey, but it's really important to know how to handle them, overcome them and turn them into a positive. Your booking appointment might be the first time you've had interaction with healthcare professionals outside of your journey thus far. It's a really important time where you can share who you are, how you want to be supported, and how you want to have a positive birth experience. This can be a difficult and sometimes a triggering time for people, so it's really important that we equip you with the tools and the positive language to ensure you can move forward. When it comes to sharing who you are and how you want to be supported with your healthcare professionals, it can be triggering for some people. You don't have to do this over the phone if you don't feel comfortable. You could have someone advocate for you and share for you to get that booking appointment sorted. You could also send an email or a letter if you'd feel more comfortable, and then these notes can be put on the system for you. If you are comfortable making your first booking appointment yourself, you may encounter microaggressions, assumptions, or people causing offence with no ill intent. They may do so because they may not ask your pronouns, they may misgender you, or they may make assumptions based on who's at the end of the phone or who's physically in front of them. This can be difficult and it can be traumatic for some. If you feel comfortable self-advocating, you can correct people if they make mistakes and there's no ill intent. Or if you don't feel comfortable, you can go back at a later date, send an email, send a letter to ensure that people address you or support you in the correct way moving forward. At the booking appointment, you may have to reiterate all of this again and consistently throughout your journey. But moving forward, it's really good to have the tools, as discussed, to know how to handle this. So when you walk into the waiting room, unfortunately you may see flyers, you may see things, marketing on the walls, images of people that don't look like you and you don't feel visibly represented and safe, and it can be a difficult time. Then you may be handed your maternity booklet, and unfortunately at that point you may be given one that doesn't state pronouns, it has mum and dad on it, and you may have to consistently cross through sections. It may be difficult again to have to do the second coming, whereby you'll have to consistently come out as LGBT+ and explain who you are, how you conceive baby, and who your support network is. Whether you're a single woman or person by choice, whether you're co-parenting in a couple or a poly family, you'll consistently have to explain who you are, who you love, and how your birthing experience is moving forward. These things are being looked at currently within the healthcare system. However, change and process can take a long time, and you're here now. So we want to prepare and give you the tools to support yourself and ensure that nothing takes you by surprise and you know how to handle it. At this point, you may encounter assumptions or microaggressions whereby the midwife might make assumptions about who you are, your journey to conceiving baby, and your path moving forward. If you feel comfortable again self-advocating, you can correct them and explain who you are, your pronouns, and how you want to move forward in regards to your care. Some people don't find this comfortable and may not feel that they can correct someone of the medical profession. So if you don't, it's really important to take someone who can advocate for you. Or if you feel more comfortable, have it written or typed down and you can share that with midwife. Maybe give them time to actually read the notes to ensure that they're aware of the pronouns you use, how you conceive baby, and the care that you really want to receive moving forward, especially in regards to language and how to support you better. Sometimes healthcare professionals may not be aware of all the different paths to parenthood, unfortunately. At this time, we understand and appreciate it's being worked through within the healthcare system, but the process may take time. So if you do feel comfortable to educate your midwife or healthcare professional by explaining a bit more in detail about your journey, then it would be a great time to help educate and empower a healthcare professional that's going to support your journey, and moving forward, they will know next time how to support someone just like you in their birthing journey. At this point in your journey, it may not be physically obvious who is the pregnant person carrying. So at this point, you may have to correct people when they make assumptions based on the physicality of those attending the appointment. Again, it's absolutely fine to correct people, so moving forward, you have a positive experience. If you're trans, non-binary, genderqueer or gender fluid, you may be met with confusion based on your notes when you have this first appointment. If you feel comfortable to educate, this is a great opportunity to explain who you are, how to support you, and the right language to use. If you find that this is really triggering or traumatic for you, it's great to take someone along with you to advocate or preempt it, be prepared, and email ahead. If you're taking someone with you to the appointment, it could be a partner, partners, or someone that's part of your support network to advocate for you. You may even at times have to advocate for them. Sometimes in that appointment, they may not be addressed or may be assumed to be someone else within your support network. This is the time where you can step in a positive way and explain who this person is at the beginning of the appointment. This is my partner, her pronouns are she, her. Or this is my partner's and their pronouns are they, them, she, her, he, him. It's a really positive way to engage with your midwife or your healthcare professional to ensure they address both or all parties in the appointment and ensure everyone comes away feeling it was a positive experience. As a partner, it can be difficult at times if people make assumptions as to who you are and what your role is in this pregnancy journey. Whether they assume that you're the mother, sister, friend, brother, cousin, someone within the support network other than your role, it can be quite difficult, and if it happens consistently, can have a lasting impact on your journey and experience. It's okay to correct people, to inform them of who you are and that your part in the role of being a parent is just as valid as the birthing partner's. This is your opportunity to change the narrative and make it a personal and positive experience. Use language like, we are both really excited, we can't wait, we would like moving forward, to ensure that you're both addressed with eye contact and that the language is inclusive of both or all of you involved. When it comes to language, it is your right as part of your birthing experience to ensure that people know how to address you, what pronouns to use, what language to use, and how to refer to you or your partner, already partners, or part of your support network. This also extends to people who may not be present in the room. For example, if you use a sperm or egg donor, you may use specific language that may feel comfortable for you, your partner or your partners to refer to your child's other genetic parent. And putting this on the form, in a letter, or explaining this to the midwife or healthcare professional will help ensure that they use the correct language moving forward. If you come away from your appointment, or your partner or partners come away from your appointment feeling that things were left unsaid or there were things that need correcting, remember this isn't the last opportunity to do so. If you don't feel comfortable saying it face to face, you can send an email or a letter or have someone advocate for you to explain and correct people to ensure that moving forward you have a positive experience and the right language is used. We've talked a lot about assumptions, microaggressions, and discrimination without any ill intent. However, dependent on where you live and dependent on the care that you receive, you may experience outright discrimination, which can be really difficult and traumatising for you and those within your support network. It's really, really important to have an understanding of what might face you. So whether it be you're not the real mum, or people misgendering you, people refusing to use your pronouns, or even not addressing you at all. Discrimination like this still does exist all over the world, and knowing how to combat it is really crucial. Take the opportunity to address it, correct it, and if they continue to discriminate against you, speak up and speak out. And if you don't feel comfortable and find it really triggering, find an ally or someone that can advocate for you to ensure that this is changed and addressed. It's really important to understand and appreciate that these situations may consistently happen throughout your journey, but that you have the right to correct people, self-advocate, have someone to advocate for you, or move forward in your journey in a positive way. The experiences and situations we've discussed today may impact your mental health or your journey, so it's really important to take a moment and take the time to address that. If you feel that you need further support, please link to our supporting PDF, and there'll be further links to other organisations that can support you on your journey. As a healthcare professional, you have a duty of care to support any patient that walks in to meet with you. So it's really, really important you take the time to get to know who we are and how to support us, specifically with the LGBT+ community, who at times have been on a difficult journey and had to overcome multiple barriers, implications within their journey. Ensure you've read the notes. Don't make assumptions based on who's walked in the room. Not everyone refers to themselves as a mum or dad or mums or dads. It's really, really crucial that you ask open questions. Who's here today? How are you all feeling? How can I help you further? Tell me about your journey. It's crucial to ensure that you can have an open and honest conversation in how to best support you. Also, if you make a mistake, move on, apologise quickly, and have the conversation carry on moving forward, because it can get uncomfortable if you misgender someone, you use the wrong language, and it can be triggering or traumatic for them. So please just move forward quickly. Be aware though that your words may have a lasting impact. And although you may have made only one mistake in regards to your language or your words, it could impact someone's mental health detrimentally, because it could have been the 25th time that the non-birthing parent, for example, was referred to as a friend or a mum or a sister, or you misgendered someone and it could be the tip of the iceberg that really affects them detrimentally. So think about that and think about how they respond and how you can support them further. As a healthcare professional, you are part of our support network and you are an extension of that. So it's really, really important that you understand and appreciate the journeys, the implications and the barriers that we've had to overcome to get to this point. Try and be an ally, try and get an understanding of who the people are that you're supporting, and also go away and educate yourself. Don't put all of the work on the person in front of you. Go away, read resources and speak to people that have lived experience. This can really help to inform you better in the care that you provide. If you see discrimination happening, speak out, speak up for us. But also if you feel that you're not being given the tools or training to support LGBT+ people on their path, better. Ask for it, speak to management, and if you see areas within the system that you feel could be improved because of your experiences with us, inform and educate and get those changed, because we need allies and people like you to support us and ensure that change really does happen. I'm Laura-Rose, founder of LGBT Mummies, and my pronouns are she, her, and here are my top 5 tips for navigating pregnancy as an LGBT+ person. Tip 1, self-advocate. If you feel comfortable, self-advocate for yourself. It's really important to do so, but if you don't, take someone along that can advocate for you. Tip 2, be prepared that throughout your journey you may experience microaggressions, assumptions and discrimination, but know that you have the right to address them and counteract them. Tip 3, be prepared that you may not be visibly represented across forms, language and flyers across the healthcare system. But if you see something and you feel that it's not right and that it needs changing, if you feel comfortable, you can speak out and you can make those positive changes happen. Tip 4, it is okay to amend things, whether it be on your forms or details regarding your pregnancy journey. You can correct people to ensure that the language used is appropriate for you moving forward in your journey. Tip 5, although you may experience barriers on your path to parenthood, it's a really exciting time and time for you to enjoy the pregnancy experience.
Hi, I'm Freddie McConnell. My pronouns are he, him. I'm a solo dad by choice to 2 kids, SJ who is 4 and LB who is 5 months, and LB who is lying over there taking a little nap, so you may hear from them or possibly even see them at some point later on. In this video, I'm going to share my experiences of both pregnancies, the sort of ups and downs, and hopefully within that some advice and insights that you might find helpful if you're about to go on this journey yourselves. So I'll firstly sort of go back in time a bit to when I conceived with SJ, which was back in, oh my God, 2017. So I conceived SJ in 2017 with donor sperm. I was always set out to be a solo parent by choice, so it was just me with the support of my parents back then. And it was amazing to conceive so easily, having been on testosterone for a few years, but at the same time I was immediately pretty nervous about being pregnant and sort of not knowing what the next 9 months would look like. At that point I wasn't really in touch with any other trans dads. There was very little online. There were a few kind of hidden communities like on Facebook that I was just starting to find, but already it was a pretty lonely, isolating experience. So from very early on with that pregnancy, I felt very nauseous, which just added to my feeling of wanting to hide away and keep my pregnancy pretty secret. I mean, I was documenting it for a film that would later be released, but during the pregnancy itself, I was very serious about the idea that I wanted to keep it as private as possible. So I only told a small circle of friends and family in my hometown. And I suppose one of the advantages of being a pregnant trans man is that no one looks at you and thinks, oh, that man is pregnant. Like, even if you had a kind of a bigger bump, which obviously I did later on in pregnancy, I was never read as pregnant by strangers. I never felt particularly at risk in that sense. I was pretty grateful for that. I felt kind of protected by my beard and my deep voice, which stayed the same throughout pregnancy and everything. So even though I really struggled physically and psychologically through the whole process, keeping it kind of secret was quite helpful back then. So what I found really hard about being pregnant the first time wasn't necessarily the physical experience of pregnancy. I was really aware of not having testosterone in my system, and that made me feel bad. That brought back a lot of dysphoria. It was almost heightened by the fact that I'd been transitioning and knew what it was like to not have dysphoria by that point. So it felt kind of like the worst dysphoria I'd ever had, because it was just like relatively so much more noticeable. But being pregnant itself didn't feel like it was causing me dysphoria. I felt like as soon as I could feel the baby kick, that was actually really helpful. It like reminded me why I was putting myself through this uncomfortable experience. And I found that very grounding. What I think was the hardest aspect overall was the kind of social side of pregnancy, and also the healthcare side of things that are inevitably very gendered. Not just gendered like female, but hyper feminine, which I actually now think a lot of cis women also don't love, which I think is kind of interesting to think about. And one thing that helped, when I was about halfway through my pregnancy with SJ, I found a sort of secret Facebook group that had some UK seahorse dads. Seahorse dads is what we call ourselves because male seahorses get pregnant and give birth. So I made contact with a guy called Jacob in the Midlands, and he was kind of my first real life trans dad friend, and we were pregnant at the same time. So we now have kids that are almost exactly the same age, which is amazing. And he had the same experience of dysphoria caused by the sort of social side of pregnancy, and he described it perfectly as like, it's like having your identity chipped away at. There's no like one big thing that happens. No one is like trying to be mean or trying to be discriminatory or rude. It's just a constant thing. Like, you can't Google a symptom, you can't go to the pharmacy, you can't look at any kind of leaflet or poster about pregnancy without being reminded that you are not seeing yourself reflected and you're not really like factored into this whole experience. So it was good to have those words, good to have someone in Jacob to talk about it with. Like, that actually was really important. That really helped a lot. Another thing I found really helpful in my first pregnancy was having an amazing community midwife. She just kind of got it from the start. I never had to really explain myself. I never really had to tell her what language was right for me. She just understood. I guess it helped that like I'm fairly masculine presenting. I think maybe like non-binary birthing parents would find that a bit more complicated, but when it came to me and my midwife Jo, like we just kind of got each other, and she always came to my house for appointments, which was very helpful. So I never had to go to like the local clinic or anything like that. And also when I did have to go somewhere, like for a scan, for instance, she would call ahead to make sure that the sonographer was cool. And in fact, she even found the place where I could go where the sonographer was queer. And so like I knew I would get a warm welcome, which was amazing. And I didn't even have to ask her to do that calling ahead thing. She just did it to kind of smooth the way for me. And I think you can see, like, I really noticed how helpful that was when there was one time when it didn't happen, because Jo was away, and actually also my mum was away, and my mum was usually the person that would come with me to appointments. Jo was away, and I had to go for a kind of unexpected growth scan just to check that baby was healthy, because they were measuring quite small. But Jo couldn't ring ahead for me, and I had to go by myself. And that was really like the one negative experience of that whole first pregnancy, but it was so negative that it really made a mark. And you know, it was probably about 6 months into my pregnancy. So after that, everything was just, I felt more nervous about everything. I wouldn't say it like ruined things, but it just made me a lot more vigilant and anxious about engaging again, you know, with NHS people and appointments and that kind of thing. So what happened was I turned up at this hospital. The receptionist was really confused to see me, didn't understand. I had to explain quietly, you know, why I was there. She eventually kind of believed me, which was kind of weird, and handed me this big orange laminated thing that said ultrasound, which felt like that. Even just the card itself kind of singled me out and drew attention, which was really the opposite of what I wanted. I went into this busy waiting room, sat down, pulled my cap down, just tried to sort of disappear into the background. And then a member of staff walked over towards me, and I could see she was coming towards me. So I got up to meet her because I just wanted to like meet her and go to where we had to go as quickly as possible. But then when we met, she just didn't say anything. And I was immediately slightly panicking. And I said, "Do you want to know my name?" And she said, "No, I want to know what you're doing here." And I just think like that's terrible care anyway for anyone, but obviously it happened because I'm trans and because I, you know, looked like a cis man, and she was very confused, but she just dealt with it in the worst possible way. And everyone in the waiting room looked at us, and then not only that, but she just left me there. She didn't take me with her. She just walked away, and so I had to sit back down. Oh, it was so terrible. So then I was called into the scan room eventually by the sonographer, who I don't think had been aware of what had happened. And he did the scan, and we didn't really talk, and I was in basically sort of fight or flight mode, and I found it very hard to just focus on why I was there in the first place. Luckily, everything was fine. It was pretty quick. I think another thing I was thinking about while I was having the scan was like, oh my God, I'm going to have to walk back through that busy waiting room, and everyone's like wondering who I am and what I'm doing there, and what is this strange situation, because it's been made into a strange situation by what that other member of staff did. When I was in the car park about to drive home, I rang my mum. That was the first thing I did, and that really helped. And then after that, I rang Jo, I think, when I got home, and explained what had happened. And she was, you know, it wasn't her fault, but she was apologetic and said I should maybe report it to the sort of patient liaison person, which I did, and that helped again. I think I saw it as, you know, there is a person doing something that's not okay, and I don't want that to happen to anyone else. So what can I do to prevent that? And that sort of, yeah, made it about them and not about me, and stopped me from getting very upset and ruminating on it too much, because I knew what she'd done wasn't okay. And again, maybe it sort of helped to think, well, it's not even necessarily about me being trans. Like, she just shouldn't be treating anyone in that way. So yeah, that was what happened, I guess, when like my safety net wasn't there for me. But then the birth itself with SJ was incredible. I think probably a couple of months after that, I went back to that hospital, but I went to the midwifery-led unit, which is part of the hospital. I never went anywhere near the labour ward or the daycare bit again. But the midwifery-led unit, I met everyone in advance. Joe helped me write a birth plan that had a little bit about language at the top to put me at ease and to put the midwives at ease. And when I went into labour with SJ, I was at home for most of the day with my mum, and then or like going up to the beach for a walk on the stones, because like that's what people who live in this town do when they go into labour and to help things progress. And then as it got dark, this was January, so as it got dark quite early, we sort of got ready to get over to the hospital about 5 p.m. and SJ was born at around 8 p.m. So yeah, when I arrived, I was already pretty far along. Got straight in the pool, had my candles, had my music, my playlist that I'd prepared. Although I actually ended up playing a particular piece of classical music when SJ was actually born, which was amazing. I guess, yeah, in my birth plan I said that I just wanted like minimal interventions, minimal pain relief, and that again is how it ended up going. But actually, I don't want to take any credit for that. I don't see that as any kind of achievement. I think what actually happened was that when I was in labour, I felt like I was on another planet, and I sort of forgot that pain relief existed. Just didn't ask for it. Like, it wasn't like I was trying to do anything on that front. I just didn't end up having any because I wasn't thinking about it in this kind of weird way, where yeah, you kind of feel like you're on another plane of existence when you're in kind of deepest labour. I kind of felt a bit out of control during the actual like final kind of pushing stages. And then afterwards, I felt like I could have understood a bit more about that, because I didn't really understand why I felt out of control, and that was a bit rushed and I ended up tearing. But yeah, other than that, everything felt like it went to plan, and SJ was born in the water, on call, which is, in the amniotic sac, which was really beautiful, and is meant to be good luck. And then I suppose for me, that doesn't really necessarily feel like the end of the story, because about 8 weeks later, I went to London with SJ in my carrier and my mum. I went to the hospital where I see an endocrinologist, which is a hormone doctor, and he gave me my first shot of testosterone to sort of get back to feeling like myself. And that was an incredible moment as well. I mean, birth was incredible, but then that kind of sense of like, wow, I did it. I stopped taking tea, I conceived, and I had my baby, started my family, and then here I am starting back on tea again. It was just like real kind of almost like movie moment of like all this stuff flashing before my eyes, and then just being able to get on with the job of like being a dad. And yeah, that was really amazing. And one of the things I'd been really worried about during pregnancy was, have I kind of ruined my transition? Am I ever going to feel good again in my body? And so one of the huge reliefs was that about 6 months after starting back on testosterone, it just felt like I'd never stopped, and almost like I'd never been pregnant, which was exactly how I wanted to feel. So that was amazing. But then it sort of complicated future decisions, because it also made me think, wow, could I go through all that again? I'd always kind of wanted to have multiple children. I'd always imagined kids, plural, in my future, although I'd never imagined actually being pregnant. That obviously, like, that was my option for doing it. But yeah, for about a good year, I'd say, after SJ was born, I thought I'll just probably stick at one, and then that way we can, I'll have more money and I'll have more time to look after him, and we'll be able to go on longer, bigger holidays and that kind of thing, So it was quite, there's lots of practical considerations that went into it. And I honestly can't really remember what made me change my mind. Maybe it was a bunch of friends having another one, trying again, and then me thinking, well, it is only, with SJ I'd conceived very easily, only like within 6 months of stopping testosterone. So I thought it would hopefully be as easy again. and it wasn't. So the second time around, when I stopped taking tea, it coincided with the beginning of the pandemic. So that immediately delayed things by about 3 months in terms of fertility clinics being closed. But yes, eventually I did happily conceive again. But it took it took over a year the second time around. So that was really hard. Again, just this sense of like, I think, being off testosterone, it's hard enough when you're trying to conceive, but just sort of counting the days of how long you've had to be off your hormone treatment makes it even harder, certainly did for me. But then on the positive side, in those years since having SJ, a lot had changed for trans parents more generally. Seahorse dads, like trans dads, also non-binary parents, were becoming so much more visible on social media. I was more visible on social media as well. I was becoming much more like confident and proud to share my story and my experience, and realizing the benefit of doing that for myself and for other people. I saw like lots of trans dads in the US being incredibly open about what they'd been through, and not just like the experience of pregnancy and birth, but their identities and how their identities shifted or didn't shift, and how they expressed that differently, and like how they parented in a gender neutral way or a gender creative way. And I just found all that so inspiring. So I felt much less nervous about, well, if I'm pregnant, like, are people going to judge me? Are people going to think I'm like not really trans? And all of the internal insecurity I felt before my first pregnancy and during my first pregnancy had sort of dissipated thanks to the increased visibility of parents like me. But then, when I was pregnant with LB, I was definitely super nauseous again. It was worse, I would say. I was actually sick as well. So I tried to take different medication to sort that out. I felt able to do that the second time around, whereas again, in my first pregnancy, I felt nervous about taking any kind of medication. Second time around, I was like, right, I just need to stop feeling this way. So I'm going to take medication. If the doctor says it's safe, then I will trust them and do that kind of thing. I think that's something quite a lot of people experience. When you're doing it all the first time, you feel much more nervous about sort of doing it all like perfectly. So unfortunately, Jo wasn't available to be my community midwife the second time around. She just stopped doing it full time. Although luckily we are still in touch because we live in a small town, so that's really nice. But yeah, I think because of the pandemic, actually, again, I had a very different experience of midwifery care, which was difficult, because that consistency with Jo the first time around had been, I felt like, kind of what got me through to a large extent. And so it's a really good thing, actually, that I was more confident and self-assured the second time around, because my midwives kept changing. And like at one point there was this new Homebirth team locally, and I wanted to be looked after by them because I did actually want to try for a Homebirth second time around. But with about 3 weeks later, the Homebirth team got shut down because of the pandemic and short staffing in hospitals. So I think I probably changed midwives like 3 or 4 times in the first couple of months of pregnancy, which is not great for anyone, but especially, needing that consistency, continuity of care as a pregnant trans person. Just, knowing that you're not going to have one of those horrific experiences of being treated like an imposter or like a threat in a space where pregnant people are supposed to feel safe. Having said that, I did eventually, have a great younger community midwife who looked after me brilliantly and did the same thing of sort of coming to my house for appointments, which was, like I said, really important to me. And then, things got a bit complicated where I had a plan to go to Sweden to give birth, because in Sweden, transgender parents are recognised on birth certificates properly. So if I'd given birth in Sweden, I could have registered as father. Whereas in the UK, currently anyone who gives birth has to register as mother, be that whether you're a transgender man or a surrogate, for instance. But what happened was that my second child, LB, was measuring really small throughout the pregnancy. And so they actually, that triggered lots of additional monitoring and scans, which I think would have been a concern and really stressed me out. But also I did notice that at the local hospital, I went to the same hospital for both pregnancies to be looked after. it was definitely really different. And I think maybe they'd had some training. Maybe it was because I'd given birth there before, but I like to think it was probably, hopefully, just a more general progression of understanding and inclusivity. But yeah, whenever I went to that hospital, to the daycare for the second time, I never felt like anyone was surprised to see me or confused to see me. And also, again, pandemic meant that it was much quieter in the hospital. So whenever I had to go and sit in a waiting room, I could generally find like a quiet space where I couldn't spot anyone kind of eyeballing me, thinking like, "What's he doing here?" sort of thing. So that was great, and equally, I saw lots more kind of consultants, and everyone was great. To be honest, I didn't have a single negative experience in an NHS hospital with my second pregnancy, which is a fantastic thing to be able to say. So yeah, we had this plan to go to Sweden right up until the 11th hour, and then when I was 36 weeks pregnant, I went for a scan, and the doctor explained that it looked as though baby had just stopped growing. They'd been tiny, which was kind of okay as long as they were still growing, but then they stopped growing. And in that moment, I immediately had to just make peace with the fact that we weren't going to be able to go to Sweden, and I wasn't going to get this accurate birth certificate, and that what that meant was that, as well as my first child not having a birth certificate because of the ongoing court case that I'm fighting, now my second child wouldn't have one either, and they would sort of become part of that court battle. And also it meant that because they'd stopped growing, I was advised to be induced at 37 weeks, or sort of within the next 7 days was what the consultant said. So suddenly, home birth, absolutely not. Midwifery-led unit, no. I'll be on the labour ward, which was a place I was pretty nervous about just because I hadn't heard great things. And they said I could have the only room with a pool, but it didn't feel anything like the midwifery-led unit. So yeah, it was. I did want to try for an induction rather than going straight for a C-section. But I suppose on the first day when the induction started, I'd say, or even before that really, when we arrived at the hospital, I just had this sense deep down that like it just wasn't going to work. And then the more time I spent in that room trying to be induced, the more I felt like, how does anyone give birth in this environment? It's very stark and clinical, and the pool is there, but it's just not until, and I'm not even kind of allowed to get in it. It wasn't great. It was a pretty stressful couple of days. I didn't get much sleep. And I guess ultimately what I felt when the consultants came round on, I think, the third day and started kind of suggesting quite strongly, we think you're going to have an emergency C-section. I felt relief. I thought I would have felt disappointment and grief and maybe like even anguish about that, but I did genuinely just feel a complete relief that someone was saying, we can just, do this now and it'll be done and everyone will be safe and happy. And that's really that's all I cared about at that point. I did actually, right at the end there, that is where I had a couple of odd moments of misgendering. So in the room that we were on in the labour ward, written on a whiteboard was sort of, I suppose, like vital statistics about me and the baby and why we were there. So it's talking about small size, and had my age and my name, and next to my name I wrote my pronouns, and I think I just wrote dad, as a reminder to everyone who was coming into that room that was who I was, as well as sharing my birth plan with the midwives and the staff on the labour ward. But what happened when the emergency C-section trigger was kind of pulled was everyone went into automatic mode, and it seemed like sort of forgot who I was and almost like forgot about me. And I understand that because it's about keeping the baby safe. But what I remember, lying on the bed, just waiting for everything to be sorted out, and these two doctors talking about my notes and what the plan was going to be, and they just kept saying she. And it was, I got really angry, to be honest. I felt like pretty raw and ragged by that point. I was exhausted. And I remember just saying, quite loudly, "Who's she?" And the doctors like went quiet, never really acknowledged what I'd said, but luckily I had this amazing newly qualified midwife who was also looking after me, and she kind of leant in and just apologized on their behalf, which meant a lot. And then I just put it behind me, and luckily when we got into the theatre for the actual procedure, everyone was amazing, and I felt really at ease, and the anaesthetist was great. He was this young guy who just made me feel really at ease, and the nicest thing was that I was able to also have a little speaker with me that my mum was carrying that had the same music on that was playing when SJ had been born, and that, when it started playing, I was just in floods of tears. This is before anything had happened, before baby was actually born, but you know, that it just made everything feel okay. And yeah, it's such a different experience to SJ's birth, but ultimately felt perfect in its own way. And you know, everyone was safe and happy, and LB ended up being slightly bigger than they thought they were going to be, so that was great. They didn't need to go to special care or anything like that. And yeah, it's quite intense talking about it. Yeah, spent a day in hospital and a night, I think, and I came home with LB and my mum, who'd been at the hospital with me the whole time, and SJ was here with Grandpa, my stepdad. They'd had a great time while we'd been away. And unlike with SJ, where I felt like I'd really needed my parents' support for a little time after the birth, when LB arrived, I just wanted my parents to go and leave the three of us together to be in our little newborn bubble, which we were for a good few weeks, and it just felt amazing. SJ was very gentle with his little sibling from the word go. He was a bit, if he was frustrated at all, he would take it out on me, which is fair enough. But I've never been worried about him being rough with LB or anything like that. It's obviously I'm conscious that he's still 4, and you know, I'm not putting any responsibility on him, but it's amazing to see their relationship immediately starting to develop and grow, and you know, it even is now. So yeah, I absolutely love being a solo dad of 2, as mad as that sounds. When I was pregnant with SJ, it was just as this organisation was starting up called Heart's Milk Bank. And as far as I know, they're the first and only community-focused milk bank in the UK. So they do supply hospitals, but they also supply families in the community directly with donor milk. You know, if they can't, if there's a parent that isn't able to chest feed or breastfeed, and they want to provide their baby with human milk for a certain amount of time. And luckily, we were able to get a small amount of milk from Hearts for SJ. And like I said, they were just starting up then, so there wasn't much, and it was incredibly generous of them to help us, even to the small extent that they could. And then when I was pregnant with LB, I think a friend of mine mentioned that actually since then, Hearts has just gone from strength to strength. So I got in touch with them again, and they were equally amazing the second time around. So just before LB arrived, we got a delivery of tiny bottles, individual bottles of donor milk from Heart's Milk Bank, which was one of their hospital packs. So that meant I could actually go to the hospital with donor milk to put in the hospital's fridge, I suppose. So it could start defrosting. So the first feed that LB had was human milk, and that was important to me. I just wanted that first little bit of, you know, milk that they had to be donor milk if it could be. And then actually I was able to continue that for I think 2 months through a mix of milk from Hearts, which is now, yeah, like I said, bigger and more organised and able to provide milk on a more kind of formal basis to families that need it. But I also had donations from an amazing array of parents who had spare milk in their freezers, stashes that either were going to go unused or were sort of excess that they could spare. Got some colostrum as well in amongst that, and I felt second time around much more relaxed about accepting that milk, and I understood about why it was safe to do that. I did checks obviously, and just so happened actually that almost everyone that offered us milk was either sort of a midwife themselves or a nurse or or had expressed milk in hospital, so it was always kind of handled very carefully and that sort of thing. And it was just lots of other LGBT families helped us actually on that front, which I just felt I couldn't even have the words to express how grateful I am for that generosity. Yeah, so it kind of meant that like both my kids had a certain amount of donor milk to start off with, and then gradually transitioned onto formula, which is great as well. Like, I'm definitely not in any way anti-formula. Both my feeding journeys have been really great with both kids, and I did try to chest feed myself a little bit because I wasn't sure if I'd be able to, having had top surgery, and I think that's a really personal thing. A, whether you want to try and do that if you've had top surgery, and B, whether you'll actually be able to. And it turned out that I wasn't really able to either time. But I'm glad that I explored that, and I would have been able to if I'd been able to. I would encourage anyone to look into your feeding options really deeply, because actually, like, probably information about that kind of thing isn't necessarily super available still, but there are lots of options for you that you might not necessarily hear about from the kind of usual sources of information. Looking back on both my pregnancies, there are definitely things I found that made things easier, being a trans person going through this experience. I'd say first and foremost, with my midwives, always asking to have my appointments at home, and then just knowing that I could ask them for whatever I needed, and that it wasn't for them to tell me how things were going to work. Like, I had that power and the ability to choose what was right for me, which I'm not sure I would have necessarily known hadn't someone not really told me that very clearly. I think a lot of trans parents who are going to give birth are interested in the idea of home birth. Like I said, I would have gone for that with my second pregnancy if I'd been able to. And I know other friends of mine who have really had positive experiences with home births and felt like they just didn't want to be anywhere near a hospital because it made them feel too vulnerable. So just make sure that you ask and know what all your options are on that front. And what else? And also, if you do go to hospital, then you can visit beforehand, you can get to know people, you can ask, whatever you need to ask, really. Like, it's your birth, it's your choice, and that counts whether you're trans or not. So don't feel nervous about that if you can. Outside of medical stuff, I found a pregnancy yoga class really helpful. I was lucky that there was one locally that was run by a friend of mine. I know it can be really difficult still to find inclusive antenatal classes, pregnancy yoga classes, all that kind of hypnobirth classes. I mean, funnily enough, the hypnobirthing stuff that I used was all free from Positive Birth Company online, and without that I probably wouldn't have been able to access any, because I wasn't sure, if people locally who were doing classes and courses were inclusive again, because often people are inclusive, but they don't remember, or they don't feel like it's necessary to be explicit about that. And I think one thing I would say to birth workers or anyone in that world watching is, like, you really do need to make it explicit on your website, because if we don't see the inclusive side of things, then we'll assume that you're not, just because you can't risk having a bad experience. So you're going to kind of keep yourself safe by not taking the risk in the first place, I suppose. And then I think, it can be hard as a pregnant trans person to feel comfortable in your body and in your clothes during this time. And during my second pregnancy, luckily someone had pointed out to me that dungarees are the most comfortable thing to wear during pregnancy and are completely gender neutral. And so I didn't have to worry about, am I going to have to go and shop in the maternity section, in the kind of women's section of a shop, or am I going to just have to wear like baggy tracksuit bottoms for months that I don't feel good in? No, luckily I was able to wear some excellent dungarees during my second pregnancy, so that would be my tip on that front as well. Another thing that you are able to do and should do if it makes you feel better is correct your hospital notes. You get this big pack of pregnancy notes that, like everything else, is coloured pink or purple usually. What I did was I just went through it by hand, crossing out the wrong pronouns or the wrong language and putting in the correct language. And we shouldn't have to do that. but you are allowed to, and it definitely helps if you, because that's the thing you're going to have to be looking at a lot of the time and taking with you to all your appointments. So just make sure that, you know, it reflects who you are, you know, even if that means like literally crossing things out and writing them back in again. Yeah, that's something that's definitely worth doing. I guess probably chances are you don't know many other trans pregnant people in real life. I certainly don't, but I did have friends online, and I followed lots of people on social media, as many as I could. I was actively seeking that out, and I would recommend that as a way of feeling part of a bigger community, seeing yourself reflected, getting advice, even like basic pregnancy advice, but that's coming from someone who looks like you and is using the correct pronouns and is aware of the extra like discomfort or challenges that you might be experiencing as a pregnant trans or non-binary person. Yeah, that's really worthwhile. There's still Facebook groups that you can join. There are now books that you can read, and there's Instagram accounts, especially from seahorse dads and trans parents, but also from birth workers like doulas and writers and midwives that are trans themselves, and certainly very like trans informed and inclusive. If you're at the start of this journey, or you're thinking that this could be you in future, I don't want to say it's all perfect. There are still things that you are probably going to encounter that aren't great, whether it's language, things like maternity, or whether it's being misgendered indirectly through forms, or just the culture around pregnancy. You know, that's probably still going to happen, and you're going to need a strong support network around you, whether that's family or friends or people online. I would say that's really important still. But at the same time, you know, since my first pregnancy in 2017, 2018, and now, things have changed a lot, and things are clearly moving in the right direction. And I think that's most visible in the NHS itself. You know, now there are resources on the NHS website that are about how to have a baby if you're LGBT plus, and how to get pregnant, and you know what happens if you've been on T, and it's all really explicit and being talked about. And Tommy's, the charity, has a section on trans and non-binary pregnancy, and that was unimaginable when I was pregnant with SJ 4 years ago. So you know, it's far from perfect, but things are definitely moving in the right direction, and this is absolutely a path to family and parenthood that is available to people like you and me. So please don't think that it isn't.